Thanks for joining and having this chat, Molly. So yeah, I mean, obviously you just changed over to you just joined ZoomInfo. I noticed, so I thought I'd reach back out and do this catch up. And yeah, I just was dying to know what was it that kind of attracted you to ZoomInfo, and sort of would love to just understand sort of how you would describe their kind of RevOps approach and how that's all structured there.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, joining ZoomInfo was really, really purposeful. I've ran Revops at, I think, around 6 or 7 different organizations so far and been a multi-time ZoomInfo customer. So really understand how to build revenue operations on top of, ZoomInfo infrastructure and seen tremendous success with this, especially in this, I don't know, new world that we're all navigating with AI and automation and just agentic in general. So when the opportunity presented itself, what better opportunity to go build RevOps at, a company that is built for RevOps, right? And, when you think about being able to be customer zero, like that's super powerful. So being able to build ZI with ZI, gives me, I like to think, a competitive advantage for my team. There's also the perk of I don't have to worry about tokens and credits in what we're doing. They're unlimited, which, saves some budget costs for me at least.
Yeah. I wish I had that same luxury. Someone else at Clay was reminding me of their unlimited tokens there on the other day. And yeah, I'm curious. Like, is go to market and RevOps, is it structured in any particularly special way at ZoomInfo, or is it sort of as you'd expect it into many other companies? I'm curious, kind of what you've seen so far. I know you just joined, but I'm sure others are dying to know if they've got any secret special sauce there that
Yeah.
others don't.
Yeah, I'd say, it's probably structured as you'd see more, progressive and innovative RevOps teams structured. It's not the traditional, sales ops only focus. We definitely have that transformation and innovation layer behind what we're doing, as well as a lot tighter collaboration with engineering and product, just as we're, continuing to shape the market and those pieces from that. I think one of the things that's, still really fun for me is just as you think about, ZoomInfo's infrastructure and what they do, like being able to come in and build on something that has that context graph already created and that right data infrastructure and architecture. Most people who come into, traditional RevOps, your first thing is the data's a mess, right? And, data's fluid and that, but really having that right foot forward on top of the platform to be able to really hit the ground running is great.
Yeah, and you have said in the past that go-to-market results never outperform data architecture. Why do you think companies still get this wrong? What happens when they try to scale AI on top of weak data foundations?
I mean, we've all seen it, right? You get the email that you're like, huh? I just got one recently where the signature of the email was myself. And it's, people are building fast, right? There's such a speed bias right now. The boards want to know, what are you doing with AI? Investors want to know what you're doing with AI. And everyone is like so sitting on like build, ship. But they're not actually looking at, one of the things they're not looking at cost, right? I think a lot of people are going to start to like really dig deeper into the efficiency of their spend for their output. And then they're not looking at the quality always, right? So they're confusing that volume with quality. And so when you think about the data architecture, you think about, just entity resolution, right? So like as you're building on something, if the AI can't actually interpret, understand, and know what it needs to be doing with that context, like you're just going to send crap, right? You think about semantic normalization, contact tracing, relationship mapping, signals, all of that graphing, right? That needs to be accurate. And I think people tend to look at this and say, like, I don't want to spend 6 months cleaning up my data or this, right? Like, and I get it, right? Now, no one really wants to do that, but you've got to start identifying what are the data points that have to be right for you to execute well. Otherwise, you're just executing poorly, which I don't think any of us want to do this, but need to take that step back and like really set yourself up for success, especially as you start putting dollars into this.
Mm. And I mean, I know it's maybe a very broad thing to ask in terms of every company's different, but where do you usually start if you're joining a company in terms of assessing and maybe trying to solve that problem?
Yeah, I think it's looking at like what are what are the end pieces that you're trying to do, right? So like where are you putting automation in place? So for me, data is a byproduct of process, right? Like anytime somebody's like, our data is wrong, your data is not wrong, right? Data can't be wrong, right? It might not be what you need for like your use case or what you're trying to do, but it's ultimately an input that you're creating based on a process that you have defined and then technology supporting it. So really taking a step back and looking at the process, right? Understanding, how does data get persisted? How does it get captured? Where does it go? How does it get validated, normalized, like those pieces, but like really starting with that process and then overlaying like what are you expecting to have happen at each point of that process and like what has to be true for it to be successful.
Mm.
And
And
how are you going to identify if it's not successful? I think that's the other piece is like we tend to build, and I know I'm guilty of this with like building workflows and automation, like thinking everything's going to work perfectly. It never
mm,
does, right? So build with errors in mind and make sure you have those like safety checks. Confidence scores are huge, right? Like build that into your model. Don't send the email if it's not confident.
yeah. And then, I mean, you just described obviously this kind of deliberate process that one would do in a team, in a company, an enterprise to go and audit their processes, and then that would kind of help to make sense of the underlying data that's in your org, and kind of that whole process of audit, et cetera, is crucial, et cetera. And then on the other hand, you've been vibe coding yourself, I think, in your spare time. You've been building with Cloud
In
Code,
all my spare time.
all
Yep.
that spare time you've got between one thing and another. But you've been playing around with these tools, I've seen, and I know you have because we've been talking about it. And I'm just curious more so, like, what's your opinion on like how long is going to take for the mid-market enterprise, like average RevOps team and org or go-to-market org to get to the place where the like bleeding edge solopreneur or like go-to-market agency is today, where they're like using command line interface connected to some MCP servers, and they're like, doing everything. Because on the other end of the spectrum with the enterprises today, they've got this huge array of processes.
Yep.
And, I think to just slap on Claude Code, which ultimately just allows anyone to generate 1,000 more processes without any guardrails, would probably terrorize these people, and rightfully so, because the last thing they need is 10,000 more workflows generated by whoever because they just felt like talking to Claude Code. That's my hot take. But I'm curious, like, between these two ends of the spectrum, like, how long until they meet? Like, and where's that? And I know I'm putting you on the spot a bit, but
No, it's a
curious.
great question, right? Because like I think there's like how long like really is dependent on the appetite and the risk tolerance of the organizations. And I think companies that even larger companies that are those bigger enterprises that want to be innovative and want to push those boundaries, like they can, right? It's understanding to me it's the risk of compliance, governance, like setting up that right infrastructure to build and support on this, but then opening up the door for innovation with those guardrails, right? I think you'll see the like earlier stage companies have more appetite for risk because they can, right? They have less to lose, ability to move fast, right? Under less scrutiny kind of for air and public pieces. So, governance in a 5-person company that's, shipping shit really fast is a lot lower, higher tolerance than, a 50,000 person company that's not going to just give everyone terminal access and Cloud Code and say go, right? So I think there's the balance of this. I do think the bigger enterprises that want to innovate, step one to me is like build that smaller like incubator team underneath and like start to look at the art of the possible, right? Go through prototyping, dev in like a more controlled but fluid environment that you can move fast and then decide how you want to move to productization of it. I think you're going to move slow if you try to be too formal in it, but you have to have the right boundaries and like balance. I think on like the RevOps side of things, like RevOps like that we know today like isn't going to be RevOps tomorrow, right? I think, when I started in this, like it was just sales ops with a better title, right? Like that was, then we moved into more of this like cross-functional like revenue coordination. Like now I think it's like far more of an architectural role, right? It's like truly looking at go-to-market architecture, building the operating system, balancing between like the human and agent workflows and processes, and like the people who have more of that, I'm going to say like architecture, engineering mindset, but understand the business are the ones that are going to thrive.
And maybe I don't know if you've got a view on this, but the kind of also on the spectrum of architecture there of choices between, say, when you're building out this architecture, maybe more future looking, to build something that's more, maybe more composable with, you know, a vendor for that and a vendor for this and a vendor for that, that's tied together by maybe Claude Code or some other series of tools, or going with like an all-in-one. Where do you feel like, um, you know, the pros and cons of that will land? And yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Like again, I'm go back to like, last 15 years in kind of this app space. We've gone through like point solutions to platforms, back to point solutions to platforms, right? I think we're in point solutions again right now because of how much there is on the market.
Mm,
And, when you look at a lot of these like orchestration tools and things like that, right? They're all pretty comparable in terms of what they can do. And so I think it's like identifying and like aligning on where you're going to build your infrastructure, right? And again, back to like governance, because I think you want to have governance, you want to have aligned kind of centralization of build. The worst thing you can do is have 10 people building in different platforms, especially all building locally. Like that's a huge continuity risk for a lot of businesses where, you've got all your agents just running local and you decide to leave the company, like what happens? So I think like
mm,
those things are really
that's a
important
very good
for
point.
people to, yeah, to think about, right? You shut down somebody's cloud access through IT and you just lost all of the things that are running the business that they were just had developed locally, right?
Mm,
So I think you've got to think about that from like the governance, the continuity standpoint, but then aligning on like, okay, here is the tech stack we're going to use. Here's what we're going to ground in, right? Making sure, especially back to like the data architecture, you're working off of the right data as well, too. Having kind of that centralized data model tip, the table schema design, right? Like goes a long way versus, somebody coming in who doesn't really know the business and is like, all right, cool, makes sense, let's go. Not going to get the right results there either.
yeah, yeah. It feels like to me, in some ways, like the biggest, like the always the better model in some ways. The superior model was the composable model, where you can get the best in class of every single piece and component of the stack, except maybe cost was perhaps higher, and so an all-in-one was maybe. The benefit of an all-in-one was that you could get scale of economies and kind of be cheaper in some cases. But the problem with a composable stack was that, you know, obviously it was complex to stitch it all together, and then also complex often to work across various tools.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest friction of working across different tools was learning the interface of every tool, the GUI. And
Hmm.
now with MCPs and Cloud Code, you can work across many different tools without ever learning or logging into those tools, because you only
Right.
need one single UI, which is like the CLI of Cloud Code or any other tool like
Hmm.
that. So we've removed one of the biggest barriers to working across these composable stacks. And I see this across so many of these go-to-market engineering consultancies, that they're able to now bring on so many more customers per go-to-market engineer, because those go-to-market engineers are like, hey, I've got like 10 .md files and 10 MCPs, and with a stroke of a keyboard, I can activate 10 tools. Whereas before I had to log in to
Yep.
this tool and log into Instantly and log into that and run that sequence. Now I don't have to do that. And I do wonder whether we've now made it so much easier to do the composable stack. Everyone will start to implement it, and whether it is just the better way or not. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's right now we're in kind of this like world of optionality, right? And so like as things come up, you're almost in this like pilot, test it out, see how it works, right? And what fits in. And you're eventually going to start to look at, cost and management and just, overall infrastructure behind those things, right? As you piece this together. But again, it's become a lot easier to work in, I'm going to say, in a Frankenstack, right? I think like if we're
Mm,
all honest and we all looked at like our tech stack and like actually put it in the diagram, right? And said what's happening, it's a Frankenstack. And that's not wrong, right? It's probably a much better Frankenstack than we had again 5 years ago, but it is a lot of different pieces that come together and you have to understand how they all are working together, as well as like the rules of engagement behind them. It's the same thing like you just described, more of like the dev process and the engineering process, but you think about like your seller experience now.
yeah.
You know, do they need to go into 12 different tools every day to do their job? Or, is it the ability to build that single pane of glass they
Hmm.
can then orchestrate from, right? So like it's balancing, that right experience with the right back end, but knowing what that right, again, back to process, flow of work should be to drive the customer experience and the seller experience.
Yeah. Yeah, I know exactly. And on that seller experience, I'm curious what your take is on the future of the seller experience, the sales rep role. Obviously, you've been a deal, which has a bajillion sales reps,
Yes.
and Engine, and now
Yep.
ZoomInfo, which has a lot of them too. Um,
Yeah. I think that there's still going to be this human craving, right? And we kind of had talked about this earlier is people are going to want to interact with people more. And I think that's is where, the seller becomes more valuable and it becomes more of this human to human type relationship that happens versus necessarily you might use agent to generate demand and start to create those perfect outreach to get people engaged, but I think what it really will come down to is buyers are already overwhelmed, they know when they're talking to a sequence versus not, having that human to human connection is really going to be what matters. I don't think sales roles are going to get, totally diminished, especially in mid-market and enterprise and larger deals. I think, down market, PLG, I look at this, I'm like, if I can just put my credit card in and get what I need or start a trial all day, I want to do that before I talk to a rep. But as you're getting, more up market, more sophisticated in this, AI is going to handle the commodity work, but the actual judgment, relationship, timing, trust, negotiation, right? That human to human connection will still persist. I think it's changing the way the sellers go about their day, and more of those soft skills are going to become a lot more important.
And then maybe doubling back to some of the just broader AI stuff. You've been doing the RevOps role for a few years now, and I'm curious, what problems do you feel are now more solvable or solved in your realm of RevOps that are just those bigger problems? You mentioned things like entity resolution, et
Yeah.
cetera. I'm curious if there are categories of problems that are less of an issue these days and that you're able to solve more effectively, where maybe previously you had always been dogged by them, or maybe you had been buying a vendor for this tool forever and now it's not a real issue anymore because you've got a
Yeah.
solution to it.
I think one of the big ones I think about is analytics, right? It used to be how do we pull, all this data together and start to put a dashboard in place, right? And it was oh yeah, RevOps, build the dashboard, right? And with semantic layers, with easier to build data infrastructure and centralization of this, again, back to having the right foundation there, you move from, just analytics, give me the numbers, right? The,
Mhm.
the hardest part was just getting the numbers
Mm.
to moving into insights, but now it's actually having intelligence layers on top of things to understand what you should do, how it's working, getting more of the detail behind things has been easier than ever to really start to drive and make decisions. For me, it's the ability to execute is so much faster than it obviously has ever been. But I think for me, it's the can versus should, right? Can is capability, and we all have all the capability now in the world. It's the should, which is the judgment, and really making sure, we're defining what is that judgment behind what we're doing, the conviction and the measurement behind this too. One of the things that I push hard on my team is if you're going to do something, what does success look like? And also what does failure look like? And how will you know the difference and when? And making sure you're setting that up so you're not just turning things on and yep, hope it works, right? You're really moving the needle. Not all movement is progress. So being really smart about the progress that you're making for the business.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, this was great. Thank you so much for making the time.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Elliot.